Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of planes overhead, not passenger jets, but bombers. Imagine stepping outside and seeing your neighbors fleeing, your flag replaced overnight, your home declared a new country. And imagine the world watching, arguing, debating, while children starve behind the front lines. That was Nigeria between 1967 and 1970, a young nation ripped apart barely 7 years after its independence. A war that killed over 1 million people, most of them civilians, and still echoes in the country's heart today. This is not just a story about politics or soldiers. It's a story about pride, fear, betrayal, and survival. The Nigerian Civil War, also called the Biafran War, was one of Africa's most painful lessons about unity, power, and the cost of being ignored. Before I continue, kindly hit that subscribe button, like, and share this video with your loved ones. Thank you. Now, let's dive in. A fragile country. When the British left Nigeria in 1960, they left behind a country that was more like 3 nations in one body. In the north, the House of Fulani held power through ancient emirates and Islamic tradition. In the west, the Yoruba built powerful cities like Ibadan and Lagos, with deep culture and political sophistication. And in the east, the Igbo were known for trade, education, and a restless drive to succeed, often moving to other regions to work and live. On paper, Nigeria was one nation. In reality, it was a patchwork quilt, stitched together by colonial rulers, not by shared trust. Balance scaled the struggle for power. After independence, things looked hopeful. But the new democracy quickly turned messy. Politicians fought bitterly along ethnic lines. Every region wanted the biggest piece of the national cake. Corruption ran wild. Elections were rigged. The military watched from the sidelines, young officers frustrated with what they saw as chaos. Then, in January 1966, a group of army majors, mostly Igbo, decided to clean up the system. They staged a coup. Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa was killed. Top northern leaders were killed. The coup was bloody, and it shocked the country. In the chaos that followed, Major General Johnson Agi Ironsi, an Igbo, took power as head of state. Many northerners saw this as an ethnic takeover, an Igbo plan to dominate the country. Tension grew. And soon, revenge arrived. The counter-coup and the pogroms. In July 1966, northern officers struck back. Ironsi was captured and killed. The counter-coup brought a new man to power, Yakubu Gowon, a young Christian officer from the north. But in the north, violence erupted far beyond the army. Rumors spread that the Igbo had killed northern leaders and wanted to rule Nigeria. Angry mobs went after Igbo civilians in cities like Kano, Kaduna, and Zaria. It became one of the darkest moments in Nigeria's history. Trains arrived in the east filled with wounded people. Families torn apart. Survivors told stories of massacres, burned homes, missing children. Hundreds of thousands of Igbos fled the north, heading back to their ancestral lands in the east, traumatized and angry. To them, the message was clear: they were no longer safe in Nigeria. The last attempt to save the Union. The country's leaders met in January 1967 in a small Ghanaian town called Aburi. They sat around a wooden table, Gowon representing the federal government, and Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, the military governor of the eastern region. At Aburi, they reached a fragile agreement. The regions would have more control. The center would be weaker. Each side would keep some autonomy. It sounded like peace. But when they returned home, both sides interpreted the agreement differently. Gowon's government saw it as too loose, a threat to national unity. Ojukwu saw the federal reluctance to honor it as betrayal. By the time they realized how far apart they were, the bridge had already burned. The breaking point. In May 1967, Gowon made a bold move. He split Nigeria into 12 states, breaking up the old regions. To most Nigerians, it seemed logical. But to the eastern region, it was a knife in the back. Why? Because it carved out the oil-rich areas of the Niger Delta, Biafra's economic lifeline. To Ojukwu, it looked like an attempt to cripple the East before it could ever stand alone. So, on May 30, 1967, Ojukwu took the microphone and declared, "Having mandated me to proclaim on your behalf, and in your name, that the eastern region of Nigeria is hereby declared a sovereign state, to be known as the Republic of Biafra." Crowds cheered. Church bells rang. And just like that, Nigeria was split in two. Crossed swords, the war begins. Nigeria called it rebellion. Biafra called it self-defense. On July 6, 1967, federal troops marched into Biafra from the north. The Nigerian Civil War had begun. At first, Biafra fought with surprising success. Its soldiers were motivated, defending their homeland. They captured parts of the Midwest and even threatened Lagos. But the Federal Army regrouped, stronger, larger, better supplied. Soon, the tide turned. Fall of Enugu and the shrinking map. By October 1967, Federal forces captured Enugu, the Biafran capital. The Biafran government fled, moving from town to town, from Umuahia to Owerri, as the front lines closed in. Nigeria used its control of the seas to blockade Biafra completely. Nothing came in. No food, no fuel, no medicine. For the millions trapped inside, survival became the real battle. The humanitarian nightmare. By 1968, hunger was killing more people than bullets. Children's bellies swelled from malnutrition. Hospitals ran out of supplies. Mothers searched for cassava leaves, tree bark, anything edible. Foreign journalists smuggled out photos of starving children with stick-thin arms and large eyes. Those images shocked the world. Charities and churches tried to help. Planes flew at night, low and quiet, sneaking food past Nigerian anti-aircraft guns. They landed on makeshift airstrips in the dark, their cargoes full of powdered milk and grain. But it was never enough. Historians estimate that over 1 million civilians, many of them children, died of starvation. The blockade became Biafra's silent killer. Battles and bloodshed. While civilians starved, both armies fought fiercely across the east. One of Biafra's greatest victories came in March 1968, at the Abagana ambush. A small Biafran unit wiped out a massive Nigerian supply convoy, destroying trucks, capturing weapons, and boosting morale. But the victory didn't last. Federal forces launched major offensives, Operation Tiger Claw, Operation OAU, and others, pushing deeper into Biafran territory. They captured cities like Calabar and Port Harcourt, cutting Biafra off from the sea completely. In towns like Owerri and Onitsha, fighting raged for months. Streets turned to rubble. Families hid in trenches as shells rained down. And then came one of the war's most horrific events, the Asaba massacre. In October 1967, Federal troops entered the town of Asaba. Believing the residents supported Biafra, they gathered hundreds of men and boys and opened fire. Bodies filled the streets. It was an atrocity that still haunts memories today. The world watches. The world couldn't ignore what was happening. Newspapers called it Africa's Forgotten War. Countries took sides quietly. Britain supported the Nigerian government, wanting to protect its oil interests. The Soviet Union also backed Nigeria, sending weapons. France gave discreet support to Biafra, mostly through neighboring countries like Ivory Coast and Gabon. Meanwhile, humanitarian groups like the Red Cross tried to deliver aid. But Nigeria insisted on total sovereignty, no foreign interference. The result was tragedy: aid convoys blocked, airports bombed, and starvation used as a weapon of war. The term Biafra baby entered the global vocabulary, symbolizing innocent suffering. Inside Biafra. Inside Biafra, life was desperate but determined. Despite the blockade, people kept creating. Engineers built homemade armored cars called ogbunig. Artists painted with palm oil and charcoal. Schools ran in caves and churches. Even under siege, Biafrans refused to give up their identity. Ojukwu's speeches broadcast nightly on Radio Biafra, his deep voice echoing through transistor radios. "My people, stand firm. The world is watching." But as months turned to years, the world wasn't doing enough, and the walls were closing in. Coffin 1969, the end approaches. By late 1969, Biafra was exhausted. Its borders had shrunk to a small patch of land around Owerri. Famine spread uncontrollably. The army was running out of ammunition, the hospitals out of medicine, the people out of hope. In December 1969, the federal military launched Operation Tailwind, a final push to end the war. On January 11, 1970, Ojukwu boarded a plane and fled to Ivory Coast, seeking asylum. Before leaving, he handed over power to his deputy, Major General Philip Effiong. 4 days later, on January 15, 1970, Effiong went on radio and announced, "We are no longer able to continue the fight. I have instructed all forces to lay down their arms." Just like that, the Republic of Biafra ceased to exist. The war was over. No victor, no vanquished. When the surrender was announced, there was no celebration in the streets. Just silence. Relief. Grief. General Gowon declared a policy of no victor, no vanquished. He promised that the Igbo and all Biafrans would be welcomed back into Nigeria. He launched a program called the 3Rs: reconciliation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. But rebuilding trust was harder than rebuilding cities. Many returning Igbos found their property seized, their savings gone. Businesses destroyed, homes occupied. They were told to start over, with only £20, regardless of how much money they had before the war. It wasn't just physical loss. It was emotional. Entire generations carried trauma, fathers lost, children orphaned, mothers starved, communities erased. The aftermath. The war officially ended in 1970, but its ghosts never left. Nigeria had survived, but unity came at a terrible price. More than 1 million people dead. Cities flattened. A region traumatized. The military, having won the war, became dominant in Nigerian politics for decades. And while the country eventually grew rich from oil, the distribution of that wealth remained deeply unequal, fueling new tensions. For the Igbo people, Biafra became both a wound and a symbol, a reminder of what they lost, but also of their resilience. Balance scale lessons from the war. The Nigerian Civil War wasn't just about secession. It was about what happens when fear, mistrust, and injustice go unanswered. When groups don't feel safe within a nation. When dialogue breaks down. When leaders choose pride over peace. It showed how fast things can fall apart, and how slow they are to heal. Even today, echoes of that war remain. In politics, in regional tension, in quiet conversations where people still say, "We don't want another Biafra." The human side. Behind every statistic was a face. A boy who carried his baby sister through miles of bush to escape bombing. A nurse who performed surgery with no anesthesia. A soldier who fought for a flag that would vanish before he turned 20. These people never made the headlines. But they were the real story, the heartbeat of a tragedy too often told only in numbers. In 1960, Nigeria won its freedom from Britain. In 1967, it lost its peace to itself. And in 1970, it stitched itself back together, not perfectly, but painfully. The Nigerian Civil War ended more than half a century ago, but its lessons remain urgent. It reminds us that a nation is more than borders. It's about trust, justice, inclusion. And when those collapse, flags multiply, but people die. The war began with speeches and pride. It ended with silence and graves. Yet somehow, from the ashes, Nigeria endured. And maybe that's the real miracle, that after tearing itself apart, the country found a way, however fragile, to keep standing.